The waitress dropped the coffee cup when she saw Muhammad Ali walk through the door. It shattered on the floor, and the sound echoed through Watson's diner like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped, every eye turned, and in that moment, a 19-year-old girl named Sarah Watson realized she was about to witness something that would haunt her family for the next 50 years. What Muhammad Ali said to her grandfather in the next 15 minutes didn't just change one man's heart. It broke a promise that 3 generations had been keeping, and revealed a secret that would rewrite everything this family thought they knew about themselves. It was August 1974, 2 months after Ali had reclaimed his title from George Foreman in Africa. The champion was driving through rural Mississippi, heading to a speaking engagement at a black church in Jackson, when his car overheated on Highway 49. Steam poured from under the hood as Ali pulled into the gravel parking lot of Watson's diner. The building was small, weather-beaten, with peeling white paint and a hand-painted sign in the window that made Ali's jaw clench. "We reserve the right to refuse service." Everyone knew what that meant. Howard Bingham, Ali's photographer and longtime friend, saw the sign and shook his head. "Champ, let's call for a tow truck and wait in the car." But Ali was already getting out, his eyes fixed on something else entirely. There, in smaller lettering below the main sign, were words that made him stop cold. Estra 1943. Watson Family Diner, serving our community with pride. Something about those dates, something about that phrase, triggered a memory. Ali stood in the parking lot for a long moment, his mind racing. Inside the diner, 19-year-old Sarah Watson was clearing tables when she looked up and saw the most famous face in America walking toward their door. Her heart hammered in her chest as she looked around desperately for her grandfather, Robert Watson, who owned the place. Robert Watson was 67 years old, a veteran of World War II, and the 3rd generation of his family to run this diner. His grandfather had built it, his father had expanded it, and Robert had maintained it exactly as it had always been, including the unwritten rule about who was welcome and who wasn't. When Ali pushed open the door, the bell above it chimed, and Robert Watson emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a large man with grey hair and tired eyes, and when he saw Muhammad Ali standing in his diner, his face went pale. "We're closed for cleaning," Watson said quickly, his voice shaking slightly. Ali looked around the diner. There were 6 customers eating lunch. Coffee was brewing. The grill was sizzling. "Doesn't look closed to me," Ali said calmly. "And that sign outside says you serve the community with pride. Last I checked, I'm part of this community." Sarah Watson watched from behind the counter, trembling. She had grown up hearing stories about troublemakers who came into the diner, but she had never seen her grandfather look so afraid. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Watson said, but his voice lacked conviction. Ali didn't move. Instead, he walked slowly to a booth near the window and sat down. "I'll have a cup of coffee," he said. "Black, no sugar." The diner fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of cars on the highway. "Sir, I told you we're closed," Watson repeated. "No, you're not," Ali said, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge. "You're scared, and I want to know why." Sarah Watson had never seen her grandfather look so conflicted. He kept glancing at her, then at the other customers, then back at Ali. "Mr. Watson," Ali said, reading the name embroidered on the man's apron. "That's your name, right? Watson?" Robert Watson nodded reluctantly. "Watson," Ali repeated slowly. "From Mississippi. World War II veteran. I'm guessing from your age. Pacific Theater." Watson's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess," Ali said. "Tell me something, Mr. Watson. When you were fighting in the Pacific, fighting for American freedom, were you fighting for all Americans, or just some Americans?" "All Americans," Watson said automatically. "That's what I thought," Ali said. "So help me understand something. Why won't you serve an American in your American diner?" Sarah Watson watched her grandfather struggle with the question. She had never seen him look so lost. It's complicated," Watson said. "No, it's not," Ali replied. "It's simple. You either believe in America or you don't. You either fought for freedom for everyone or you fought for freedom for some." Ali leaned forward in the booth. "Mr. Watson, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. In 1942, when you were probably training to go overseas, my father tried to enlist in the army. You know what they told him?" Watson shook his head. "They told him the army didn't need any more Negroes, told him to go home and wait for his country to call. But they never called. And while you were fighting for freedom in the Pacific, my father was fighting for the right to fight for freedom at home." The diner was completely silent now. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped. "Now here's the thing," Ali continued. "I don't blame you for that. That wasn't your decision. But I'm here today, in 1974, and I'm asking you to make a decision. Are you going to serve an American citizen a cup of coffee, or are you going to tell me that all your fighting for freedom didn't include my freedom?" Robert Watson's hands were shaking now. Sarah could see sweat beading on his forehead. "You don't understand," Watson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are things, family things, promises, What promises? Ali asked. Watson looked around the diner nervously. The other customers were listening to every word. I can't. I gave my word. To who? To my father, before he died. Ali leaned back in the booth, studying the old man's face. What did you promise your father, Mr. Watson? For a long moment, Robert Watson said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet that Sarah had to strain to hear him, he said, I promised him I'd never serve colored people in this diner. Why? Watson's eyes filled with tears. Because he said if I did, he'd turn over in his grave. He said our family had a reputation to maintain. He said, Watson stopped talking, unable to continue. He said what? Ali pressed gently. He said I'd dishonor the memory of my brother. Ali frowned. Your brother? Billy Watson. He died in France in 1944, Normandy. I'm sorry for your loss, Ali said sincerely. But what does your brother's death have to do with not serving black people? Robert Watson broke down completely. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to speak. Because Billy died trying to save a Negro soldier, he said. And my father always said, Billy died for nothing, that he threw his life away for people who weren't worth saving. The revelation hit the diner like a thunderbolt. Sarah Watson gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had never heard this part of the story. Ali was quiet for a long moment, processing what he'd heard. Then he spoke, his voice softer than before. Mr. Watson, let me ask you something. Do you think your brother died for nothing? I don't know. Do you think the man your brother died trying to save was worth saving? I don't know, Watson repeated, but with less certainty. I do, Ali said. That man your brother died for. He had a family, children, dreams. He went home to Mississippi or Alabama or wherever he was from, and he lived his life, and he raised his children, and maybe one of those children grew up to be a doctor or a teacher, or maybe even a soldier himself. Ali stood up from the booth and walked to the counter where Watson was standing. Your brother didn't die for nothing, Mr. Watson. He died for exactly what you fought for. The idea that all men are created equal. The idea that America is a place where a man's worth isn't determined by the color of his skin. But my father said, your father was grieving, Ali interrupted gently. He lost his son, and grief makes people say things they don't mean, makes them look for someone to blame. But that doesn't make it right. Ali reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was old, creased, showing a young black soldier in uniform. This is my uncle, Ali said, placing the photo on the counter. He died in Italy in 1943, died fighting for a country that wouldn't let him vote, wouldn't let him eat in most restaurants, wouldn't let him stay in most hotels. But he died anyway because he believed in the idea of America, even if America didn't believe in him. Robert Watson stared at the photograph, his shoulders shaking. Mr. Watson, you and I, we're not enemies. We're allies. Your brother and my uncle, they died for the same thing, for the idea that America could be better than it was, for the idea that someday a black man and a white man could sit in the same diner and have a cup of coffee together. Ali picked up the photograph and put it back in his pocket. The question is, are you going to honor your brother's sacrifice, or are you going to let your father's grief define your life? For several minutes, the diner was completely silent. Robert Watson stood behind the counter crying quietly, struggling with 30 years of family loyalty and personal conviction. Finally, he looked up at Sarah. Sarah, he said, his voice hoarse, get this man a cup of coffee. Sarah Watson moved like she was in a dream. She walked to the coffee pot, poured a cup, and set it on the counter in front of Muhammad Ali. Thank you, Ali said simply. As Ali drank his coffee, Robert Watson sat down across from him. I've been carrying my father's anger for 30 years, Watson said. I think I'm tired of it. Anger's a heavy burden, Ali agreed, especially when it's not really yours to carry. What do I do now? Ali smiled. You start by taking down that sign in the window, and then you tell everyone who'll listen about your brother Billy, and how he died saving a man who deserved to be saved. Robert Watson nodded slowly. Sarah, take down that sign. Sarah Watson walked to the window and carefully removed the "We reserve the right to refuse service" sign. As she crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, her grandfather spoke again. Sarah, there's something else you need to know about your great-uncle Billy. Sarah turned back to her grandfather. The man Billy died trying to save? His name was James Washington. He survived the war, came back to Mississippi, became a teacher. He taught school for 40 years. Watson paused, gathering his courage. And every year on Billy's birthday, he sent a letter to our family, thanking Billy for saving his life. Sarah's eyes widened. What happened to the letters? Your great-grandfather threw them away. Everyone told me they were lies, that Washington was making it up. Watson's voice broke again. But I saved one. Just one. I've kept it for 30 years. Watson walked to the back office and returned with a yellowed envelope. He handed it to Ali. Would you read it? He asked. Ali opened the letter carefully and read it aloud. Dear Watson family, today marks the 25th anniversary of the day your son Billy saved my life in France. I think about him every day. I think about how he could have saved himself, but he chose to save me instead. Because of Billy, I came home. Because of Billy, I was able to marry my sweetheart, raise 3 children, and teach hundreds of young people. Billy didn't just save one life, he saved all the lives that came after. I named my first son Billy in his honor. Every year I tell my students about the white soldier who died so that I could live. I tell them that's what America means at its best. People taking care of each other, no matter what they look like. I hope someday to meet Billy's family and thank them in person for raising such a hero. Respectfully, James Washington. The letter was dated 1969, 5 years earlier. When Ali finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the diner. Mr. Washington is still alive, Ali said quietly. He's 72 years old, and he lives about 50 miles from here. I know because his grandson is a friend of mine. Robert Watson looked up sharply. His grandson? He's a doctor now. James Washington Jr. He works at the hospital in Jackson. Still talks about his grandfather Billy Washington. That's what they called your brother. The family has been telling the story for 3 decades. Watson was sobbing now. All these years I thought Billy died for nothing. He died for everything, Ali said. And now you get to decide whether his sacrifice continues to matter. That afternoon, Muhammad Ali sat in Watson's diner and ate lunch. Word spread quickly through the community, and by evening the diner was packed with both black and white customers, many meeting each other for the first time. Robert Watson served them all personally, telling anyone who would listen about his brother Billy and the man he saved. 6 months later, Watson's diner hosted a special dinner. Robert Watson had tracked down James Washington Sr., now 73, and invited him and his family to be honored guests. When the 2 old men met, they embraced and wept together. "Thank you for raising Billy," Washington said. "Thank you for living," Watson replied. Sarah Watson, now 20, served them both. She had enrolled in nursing school and planned to work alongside Dr. James Washington Jr. at the hospital in Jackson. Muhammad Ali attended that dinner. In his brief remarks, he said, "Sometimes the most important victories happen not in boxing rings, but in small diners where people choose courage over comfort." When Robert Watson died in 1991, his funeral was attended by hundreds of people, both black and white. The service was held at an integrated church that Watson had helped fund. Dr. James Washington Jr. gave one of the eulogies. "Mr. Watson taught me that it's never too late to honor the people who deserve to be honored," he said. "He spent the last 17 years of his life making sure my grandfather's sacrifice was remembered the right way." Today, the Watson family diner still operates in the same building. It's run by Sarah Watson, now 69, who has served the integrated community for 5 decades. On the wall hangs a framed photograph of Billy Watson and James Washington Sr., taken when they were reunited in 1975. Below the photograph is a plaque that reads, "Dedicated to Billy Watson, who died saving a life, and Robert Watson, who spent his life honoring that sacrifice. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you were wrong." The plaque was donated by Muhammad Ali, who kept his promise to check on the Watson family for the rest of his life. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't won with fists, but with the courage to let go of the anger that isn't yours to carry. And sometimes the most powerful words aren't, "I can beat you, but I understand you." Muhammad Ali showed Robert Watson that day that heroes aren't just the people who die for their beliefs. Heroes are also the people who live for their beliefs, even when those beliefs require them to change everything they thought they knew about themselves.